Okay, so the British Labour Party is in utter turmoil, and as a result, our government, our socialist government at this point, is literally on the brink of collapse. Now, they've had a very, very bad year to start. This has been one of the worst first years for a ruling party in the United Kingdom for a long time. In fact, it's been their worst start for a brand new party in terms of polling and opinion polling for their first year since 1993. So absolutely horrific. But this last week in particular has been just complete chaos. And now the UK government is in total turmoil, and they don't really have a path out of this. The stock market, the FTSE 250, has been falling, which is not good for a stock market that hasn't even been rising over the last couple of decades, unlike the S&P 500. Government debt is exploding in size, and our yield, the amount we're paying in interest on that government debt, is going up a ridiculous amount as well. And then the really big issue here is that the government can't control their own members of parliament. They cannot control their own party, which means they cannot govern the way they would like to. In essence, if you haven't kept up with UK news over the last week, the Labour government planned reductions to benefits, right? Now, this specific benefits, or welfare as you'd call it in the US, is something called PIP. But these changes had a massive revolt within the Labour Party where they just refused to back the government, killing their attempt to reduce the amount of benefits spending in this country. And now there's been this mass loss of confidence in the Prime Minister, in the Chancellor, and just the government as a whole. The worst part of all of this is that the Chancellor was literally on camera in Parliament bawling her eyes out. Pretty horrific stuff. So I'm going to give us all a little bit of background here just to show you why this is so important and where these problems actually stem from. Now, the first thing is that the Tory party, the Conservatives, who were in power over the last 15 years, 14 of those, they did not do a good job with the economy. GDP has basically been stagnant since 2006. Right here is a graph of GDP per capita in US dollars of the United Kingdom over the last few decades. And you see that we actually had some growth in the 90s, all the way up to the great financial crisis, the global financial crisis in 2007, when things went down and then a little bit up and down and a little bit up. And today, the average Brit is still poorer than they were almost 20 years ago, 2007, 18 years ago. We still have had zero real economic growth during that entire period. So the country, our finances, our economy, is in dire straits. This is the kind of stuff you hear about happening in Japan with a lost decade. We're now nearing in on a lost 2 decades in a row. The other problem that comes along with all of this is mass immigration. Obviously, there's this growing narrative around the UK that it's a country built by immigration, but that simply isn't true. In fact, Britain was built by emigration, by more people leaving the country than coming for decades and decades and actually centuries, going off and founding countries like the United States and Australia and Canada and everything. But in the early 90s, we had Blair come into power, and he fundamentally changed the way the UK was structured and started the process of mass immigration. This blue line here being total immigration per year, 500,000 a year here in the early 2000s, when it was, well below 200,000. Just a couple of decades earlier, peaking up above more than 1.2 million people coming into the country in a single year over 2021 and 2022. Absolutely monstrous numbers that the economy, the country literally cannot deal with. This has created mass political turmoil because people are just getting poorer in the United Kingdom and their lives are getting worse. And it's all stemming from these institutional structural changes that we've seen in the country over the last couple of decades. But that does lead us on to the late 2010s, right? The Tories had not been doing a brilliant job during the 2010s, but they had mostly been holding it together. They had a coalition government. It wasn't easy for them to actually govern. And then we had the Brexit referendum, and then 3 years of really nothing happening there. And that led us on to Boris Johnson and the 2019 election landslide, where you can see the results here. There's a lot of blue on this map. That's the Conservative Party. That's actually a massive vote share, and that there is a rather large majority. They only needed 326 seats to actually win a majority. They got well above that. This was all based on the idea of getting Brexit done. Basically, the country was just tired of hearing about what kind of Brexit we should see and how hard or soft it should be. And we just wanted to be past that stage in our lives and move on with, being a country going forward. But then the COVID crisis came along. And despite this large majority here, the really important thing is that actually the country and the government wasn't able to govern after the COVID crisis. Scandals became, the most commonplace thing in the news, and they just dominated the media landscape, and the government fell apart. Then we had Liz Truss getting voted into power, not by the members of parliament, not by the Tory politicians themselves, but by the Tory members of the party. So ordinary people who just pay 20 quid a year, whatever it is, to be a member of the Conservative Party, they're the ones who actually got together and voted and put Liz Truss in the position of Prime Minister. The members of Parliament, the actual politicians, really didn't want her there, so they orchestrated this little bit of a coup and they got rid of her within just a couple of months. Rishi Sunak held on to the whole thing and kept things stagnant, but really had no chance of winning the next election. And that's where we move into the Labour Party today, basically, right? We had that 2024 election where Labour then switched it all around and won a massive majority. 251 Conservative politicians, MPs, lost their seats in that election, and Labour added an extra 211 MPs. Absolutely monstrous win. This is one of the biggest majorities we will likely ever see in our lifetimes. Massive, and it should have given the Labour Party the ability to do literally whatever they wanted within the country. The map here, absolute chaos. But in essence, yes, this is a massive majority, and the Labour Party should have the political will and the mandate to do whatever they wanted. The problem is that supposedly that 5-year process, we're 1 year into that now, and it's just an absolute complete shambles. The economy has not been getting better. In fact, it's gotten a lot worse over this first year of Labour coming in. Consumer confidence is down, disposable income among people is down, government debt yields are rising, so the huge amount of debt we have in our country, that's getting more and more unaffordable, and then there's this massive government deficit as well, so we're making that debt bigger every single day. And then cherry on top, Labour's solution to all of this was to tax the rich, to tax the wealthy. We just got new data showing that 16,500 high net worth individuals left the United Kingdom over the last year. That's the highest in history. It's worse than any other country in the world. So by trying to tax the rich, they've basically just run them off, and now they're not able to get any of that tax revenue coming in. And that really leads us to where we are over this last week. Basically, Labour put forward this piece of legislation where they wanted to reform PIP, Personal Independence Payment. It's basically a form of benefit, a form of welfare for people who are supposedly ill or incapable of working to their fullest extent. It is not means tested. So you can make, £100,000 a year or £1 million a year and still get this form of welfare or benefits on top. It's based entirely on how much you're impacted by your supposed disability. Now, the numbers of this has absolutely exploded in recent years, and so Labour were looking to stop us becoming a welfare state. We already are a welfare and a pension state, but they wanted to reverse course a little bit there, and they were aiming with this reform to save about £5 billion a year, about $6 billion in US dollars. Now, the reason they had to reform this is because the system genuinely is absolutely atrocious. Here's one of the worst things here. Claimants for PIP who had a face-to-face personal independence payment assessment last year were a quarter less likely to get an award than claimants who had a telephone or a video assessment. So one of the big changes with COVID is that our government services have just gotten ridiculously inefficient, and they've moved to phone calls, literal phone calls or Zoom calls, to try and work out if you're disabled and if you should get this form of benefit. And of course, if you do a phone call, you're 25% more likely to get that benefit than if you go in person. So alongside that, we've seen massive numbers increasing of the types of things that are causing this PIP to be payable. So here's some of the worst numbers. PIP payments for autism, so benefits for people with autism, 26,000 to 114,000 over the course of 5 years. That's a ridiculous explosion. No one genuinely believes that, the number of autistic people in the country has increased 5-fold over the last 5 years, yet the benefits we're giving out for has. Anxiety and depression, yes, you can get benefits because you are anxious in the United Kingdom. 23,000 people on that in 2019. Shouldn't be any, to be honest, should it? 2025, now 110,000. ADHD. I have ADD. It sucks a little bit. I struggle to concentrate. But guess what? I shouldn't be paid off by hardworking taxpayers because my mind just isn't as capable of concentrating on one thing as well as some others. Obesity here as well, another ridiculous one. This is not a disease. This is just you're too fat and you need to lose weight and eat less. 2,000 people in 2019, 11,000 in 2025. So we've had a mass expansion of the type of diseases and supposed disabilities that people are able to get this benefit from. And we've had a mass expansion on the numbers of people who are getting this benefit as well. Now, some other ridiculous things about this. Brits living outside of the United Kingdom can get this benefit. So you can live in the EU or live in another country as a British citizen, not pay any British tax, yet still get paid this disability. On top of that, non-British citizens within the United Kingdom can get this benefit. So you can come off a boat and never having lived here before, never paid into the system, never paid any taxes, and still get this form of benefit paid for by hardworking British taxpayers. And essentially, this reform was widely needed, but the Labour Party threw a massive fit and they revolted against their own government to ensure that it didn't happen. Why did they do that? Well, very likely it has something to do with the fact that Labour holds about 200 seats where the number of PIP claimants is greater than its MPs majority. So maybe they have 10,000 people in their constituency who are getting this benefit every month, and their majority, their victory in the last election, was only 4,000 or 5,000 votes. So if they lose those 10,000 PIP claimants as voters, there's a very high chance that they are going to lose their ability to govern and get elected out. Basically, Labour's MPs corralled together and started leaking little bits to the press saying that they are not going to vote in favour of this bill. In fact, they're going to do the opposite and they're going to work really hard to destroy it. It escalated and the Labour government slowly pulled back the changes they were making to this PIP bill. Suddenly it wasn't going to save $5 billion a year anymore. It was only going to save $2.5 billion. And then the number of rebellious Labour MPs did reduced a little bit at that point, but it didn't drop altogether, and they were still facing a lost vote. So they cut down and watered down the bill even more, to the point where, as it stands, just having been passed, it's only going to save £500 million a year. So £5 billion a year in savings a week ago, now down to £500 million a year. Obviously, the Labour government is terrified at this because they've already been raising taxes and destroying the economy in doing so, and they've just tried to cut government spending so they don't have to raise taxes even more, and their own party rebelled against them and sent this whole thing into chaos. The Labour MPs, it really appears, don't understand basic economics. One Labour MP was actually quoted as saying, "I don't understand why this means more tax rises. It's only a few £1 billion." She genuinely believes that there is a magic money tree, which is just going to print money and take us out of this mess, and that we can spend as we want, however, and nothing really matters. So this new bill, hugely watered down. Even after being watered down to only save $500 million a year, guess what? 49 of Labour's MPs still rebelled against the government and voted against even the watered down bill, to the point where Labour almost lost that vote. They actually didn't win it by a clear margin at all. It was close. Labour are now out there trying to spin this win as a win in Parliament. They're trying to tell the people that, look, they've listened to criticism and they've come out with a better bill that's going to be better for people at the end of it. In reality, it's utter chaos. And this leads me to the next thing I want to show you here, which is our Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, right here in the background, you can see her, crying in Parliament during a debate where the Labour government are trying to justify this change and the U-turns that they've had throughout this. Genuinely, 2 tears falling down her face, a wobbling mouth, incapable of holding it together whilst on TV in front of the entire country. Now, why was she crying? There's a little bit of disagreement here, right? Some people are saying that this was a personal matter and that it's something we shouldn't intrude upon. That seems incredibly unlikely. Rachel Reeves, a representative for her, has said that actually she was chastised by the Speaker of the House for not following the rules of Parliament, and that he was rather rude to her and maybe even bullied her, and that's why she was crying. In reality, the reason she's crying is her political career is up in flames. And there's a very high chance she's about to be sacked and will never hold one of the high offices of state again in her lifetime. Now, one thing I do want to talk about this, I see a lot of people on both sides of the fence saying that we should be mocking her for crying, or saying the other thing, that we should be incredibly empathetic and see that it's hard for her. I don't fit into either of those camps, to be honest. I do not have any sympathy for her. I think, frankly, you should not be a weak person if you want to rise to the top of politics in the United Kingdom. You are going to represent our country on a global scale. And if you can't hold it together when you think you might be out of a job, you should just not be in politics. You shouldn't even be running a company. You should be working as a bank teller, which funnily enough is exactly where she came from. So no, personally, I don't have any empathy for her. I don't have sympathy for her either. I think she's in a position she never should have been in the first place. She isn't qualified for this role. She's done a horrific job. She's destroying our economy and our country. And so no, I don't think we should be sympathetic towards her for crying in Parliament. The other thing is, really, this is an awful look for someone who's supposed to have their grip on the finances of the country. And traders and investors have noticed this, and they're really, really quite unhappy as well. The pound was losing value as this was happening. Traders were literally watching this video, live video feed of our Chancellor, the woman in charge of our entire economy, crying on camera and thinking, well, I have no faith in her. She's not a serious person. She's not even capable of keeping her emotions at bay at a very serious time. Why would we have any faith in her ability to guide our entire economy through a very turbulent time? So yes, you shouldn't be crying if you are one of the great, politicians in our country. Now, what does this really mean for the country going forward? Well, a lot of people saw this massive victory for Labour, and they saw this as a mandate for the country to undergo like some socialist reformation. And they have started to undergo this socialist reformation, but it's completely failed. And a lot of people are saying, well, look, there's 5-year terms here. We've got another 4 years left. There's no chance in hell that the Labour government collapses over those 4 years. So they're still going to get 4 years to put their plans into action and see how it goes. I'm really not so sure here. We had the exact same story when it came to Boris Johnson and his massive majority, but that still led to a government collapse, right? This mass media negativity surrounding Boris Johnson and a load of scandals that happened during COVID, it led to members of parliament of his own party losing faith in him. And there was a vote of no confidence against him, which led to Boris being ousted and Liz Truss coming in, and then Liz Truss being ousted, and then Rishi Sunak coming in, and then Rishi Sunak calling an early election. There's a very, very high likelihood that we see something similar happen within the Labour Party and within our government over the next couple of years. So far, Starmer has tried to do things and been shot down and turned around by his own party on numerous occasions. A couple of months ago, he came out with a speech where he basically spoke out against mass immigration, which was, incredible to hear for a left-wing politician to actively talk against mass immigration. But his own party revolted against him and went on TV and started basically just talking bad about him and what he said. And so, what did we see a week ago? Well, he came out and did an interview where he said he deeply regrets the statements he made in that speech, and he doesn't actually think of any of those things. So there's a U-turn there where he wanted to go a certain direction and his own members of parliament forced the government to change tact. We had a similar U-turn to what we just saw with PIP, with the winter fuel payments, basically a form of benefit for pensioners in the United Kingdom so they can afford to put heating on. A little bit of an unnecessary benefit. It shouldn't be separate from any other kind of system like universal credit, in my opinion. But he took it away. There was mass media outrage for months on end, and then he U-turned and changed his mind and put it back in. There was a U-turn regarding the grooming gangs inquiry, right? The UK has been plagued by these mass Muslim Pakistani grooming gangs over the last few years. And the Labour Party has been desperate to keep this on the down low and to stop it from becoming mainstream media and mainstream news, because they have a huge voter base from the demographic of the people who are committing these atrocities. So Keir Starmer said, no, we don't need a national inquiry into this scandal. And then a couple of weeks later, he had to change his mind again, was forced by the political environment of the country to change his mind and grant a national inquiry. We've had this U-turn with PIP, with that reduction. We've had a U-turn with no income tax rises. Labour said very clearly when they came into government that they were not going to increase income taxes, but they raised national insurance on employers, which is an income tax. And then we've also had a U-turn surrounding trans women are women. Starmer used to genuinely think that you can just take a few hormones, or even not that, just wear a dress and now you're officially a woman. He had to go back and change that after the Supreme Court in the UK ruled that women are women and trans women are not women. Now, what I want to be clear about here is that an early election is not at all guaranteed, and the markets are watching what's going on here in real time. And they are losing faith in the Labour government and just our country as a whole, and that is costing us economically. what we can see here, if we look at this slide here, is that any election that were to happen over the next year minimum would lead to another seismic shift where Labour is decimated and the Reform UK, this new upstart party led by Nigel Farage, is going to come into power and become our government. Here's the most recent poll as it's distributed out and expected. This is what it would look like for the country as a whole. Reform on 377 seats, up 372, ridiculous gains. Labour down 294, Conservatives broken down into almost nothing, and a sea of light blue, with Labour barely even the opposition here, with the Liberal Democrats almost taking over there. Now, this is just one poll, but every single poll that we've seen over the last 3 months has shown that the Reform Party are actually the most popular party in the United Kingdom at the moment. And any election that were to happen over the last year, to be honest, would have led to Reform being, if not an outright majority, at least the largest party in the country. It's incredibly likely that that trend continues for the next couple of years because Labour are just in turmoil and they have no ability to actually fix anything here, right? The fundamental problem is that our country is inefficient and not rich anymore, right? We have too many people working in the private sector, being inefficient with their roles and just not actually making the country money, but costing the country money through their salaries and their benefits and their welfare and everything instead. To change that requires mass political will on the side of a government to actually put into place policy changes and bills which are going to strip benefits away from millions of people. Labour just tried to do that, and they had a revolt within their own party. They don't want to raise taxes more because they've seen how disastrous it's been over the last year raising taxes and how that's impacted our economy, but they literally have no choice at this point. The government finances are out of control, and so they have to raise taxes or lower spending. And when they try to lower spending, their own party revolts against them and says, no, you can't do that. We won't vote with you and you'll just lose the ability to govern the country. So their only option here is to raise taxes. We've already seen that raising taxes on rich people doesn't work. 16,500 high net worth individuals leaving the UK in one single year. The worst mass exodus of wealth that we've seen in history. And now Labour politicians going on TV and saying that, well, okay, we can't save 5 billion here by cutting PIP, but we can just raise taxes on the rich with a wealth tax instead. All that would do is cause more wealthy people to lose the country and less tax revenue to be collected on the whole. In essence, our country is really in a dire strait, but our socialist government in particular is absolutely screwed at this point. It's just a question of how long can they hang on until they have an important vote where the government has to whip their MPs to vote a certain way and they rebel against them. Then we have a government in chaos, the government would literally fall and we'd have an early general election called. My bet is on 1 to 2 years, to be honest. I don't really see Labour going further than that. If they do manage it, I'll be incredibly surprised, but not exactly happy. Of course, economically, this is going to hurt for millions and millions of Brits. Taxes are up and growth is down. Mass immigration is continuing. That's not going to stop. So we're going to have constant wage pressure pushing the value of our labour downwards with this mass influx of supply of labour. So if you are interested in seeing how this develops, maybe you're an American and you don't get to see quite such an in-depth video on British politics and our economy and how everything works, then make sure to follow along for more. And trying out a new form of content, new style of content here, no editing, nothing scripted out, just some talking points that I've gone over and collated and a few pictures to show you what I'm talking about, and then me rambling for a little while. So if you like this sort of content as well, please just leave a comment and let me know. If you don't like it as well, tell me the exact same thing, because I'm really not going to know unless you guys tell me. And I'm just getting back into Stoic Finance full time here, and I'm really, really enjoying talking about this because I'm so passionate about the problems that we're seeing in my country in particular, but the world as well right now. And then finally, if you are interested in starting an online coaching or online consulting business, check out the link down below in the description. I put together a free guide where I explain exactly how the $200 billion a year online coaching industry works and how you can take your experience, your knowledge, your expertise and turn that into a 6-figure online income, which is exactly what I've done over the last few years. And that's why, you take a look at my upload history over the last 3 years. It really hasn't been very consistent at all. That's because I've been building my online coaching business, Grow Coach. So if you are interested by that, check out the guide down below in the description. It's free. You can download it. You can opt out of the emails you get whenever you want as well. And then there's a free training video to go alongside it, explaining exactly how the industry works and how you can take, knowledge or experience you have with building a business maybe, or working in a career for a long time, or just a hobby or a sport that you're really, really interested in. You can take that information you already have and just start selling it to other people online who would really like to learn from you. So yeah, thanks for watching.